Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, a subject that is increasingly getting me intrigued is how the worlds of technology and music are colliding. And I've talked in the past of how it is changing how musicians create music. But today, I want to learn more about how technology is making it easier for A&R reps to help music publishers to discover songwriters and new artists. But we've got so much to talk about, I don't want to reveal any spoilers. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Brooklyn so we can speak with Travis Rosenblatt about how Meddling are using technology to find emerging artists to sign, and also how the consumption of data is changing the way the music industry discovers musical talent. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Travis. Can you tell the listeners a little more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Travis Rosenblatt. I'm over in New York, out in Brooklyn, and I, for the last 6 years, which is kind of crazy to say out loud, have run an artist discovery platform that is used by most of the majors and a large number of the indie labels just to help them surface new talent.
And looking at your background, it does include work as an A&R rep in the music business, but I'm curious, how and when did your journey in tech entrepreneurship begin? Because I got a feeling there's got to be a story there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. It was never, journey in tech entrepreneurship makes it sound very romantic for what the actual experience was. I left university and started working for these record labels doing A&R, which is a very strange job. You're basically just a professional music snob, and it's a fantastic job, and was really a lot of fun. Your job is just to go to shows, to judge music, to talk about what trends are happening, what bands we should be looking at, sign bands, working on records, but it's a very kind of unstructured job. And I started out, not knowing what I was doing, what I was supposed to be doing. And, as I was sitting there, I had a very sneaky feeling I was supposed to be doing more than I was, which maybe I wasn't. And I was just in my own head about it. But I started just simply keeping tabs on what was happening online. And at the time it was, just looking at blogs and, maybe scanning, iTunes top, 100 chart or whatever, just to know that, I knew everything that was moving. After doing that for a bit, kind of quickly realized that the things that other A&Rs were bringing in, I already knew about, already had a perspective on, was already on top of, just very simply by keeping tabs of the chatter online. And that at the time was a very manual process. And I, when I was doing A&R, had asked kind of every music-focused tech company out there to build something that would make it easier for me to keep track of. At the time, that was, Nielsen, Next Big Sound, Music Metric. There were really only a few companies, and none of them went and did it. So at the very end of 2014, when I left the last label I was working for, I had some time and I essentially wanted to see if I could do it, if I could put together something that would make my life easier in my next job. And I built, a super early version of what the company is now, sent it to, the people around town are talking about jobs. And instead of them saying, great, you're hired, they said, great, how much does this service cost? So that's when I realized, this is a company. This is what I do now. So I had to go and learn how to build the rest of it, continue building it out, and start onboarding customers.
And your role in A&R there almost feels like the ultimate hipster job. You officially listen to bands that don't even exist yet, right?
Right. Yeah, that was the idea. If they had any releases yet, you'd been failing at your job. Yeah, it essentially was, and it was absolutely a dream job, and it was a lot of fun because it was such a non-traditional role. And I had an immense amount of fun, discovering bands, talking about music all day, just kind of, getting paid to be snobby about music. But I was very, very bad at managing up or dealing with kind of corporate politics. So I kept going into these companies, having fun discovering bands, not understanding why I wasn't having success signing these bands and why I wasn't getting listened to. And then invariably within about 6 to 18 months getting fired and having to start over again. And kind of forced myself in the realization that I think I have to work for myself. If I'm not in charge here, I get very frustrated.
And I recently had a guest on here when we were talking about how the first 30 seconds in a song matter more than ever, because I think Spotify only pay if the user actually listens beyond that 30 seconds. So as a result, people are designing or creating music completely differently. They're not having that long intro. They're going straight in with a chorus just to keep people listening longer. But I'm curious, how are you seeing consumption data changing the way that the music business discovers musical talent now?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, these are two separate but related things, I think.
Yeah.
Not only, you see people, front loading these songs to make sure that you're hitting the chorus within the first, 5 seconds, because you can't wait the 30 seconds. You're also, you have songs, you have not albums, you have nowadays, people creating songs that sound like they're made for social consumption rather than just casual listening, all kinds of things on that side. On the actual, the tail wagging the dog, the music consumption changing, artist discovery, for these labels processes, it really has been at the kind of high end of the labels on the major side of the labels, a very quick shift. When I started this company 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, wow. I would show it to A&Rs and they would be insulted. They'd be like, how dare you? I hear hits in my sleep. I have ears made of gold. Looking at numbers is beneath me, until very quickly there were a large number of hits that were, so-called research songs, where they were things that, the consumers led first, and then they had to chase them down. And we've now very quickly got to a place where, the labels aren't making hits. The audience, the consumers are making hits, and then the labels are chasing after them afterward. And I'm not saying that's how it should go. I think we have a long way to come in order to kind of recognize the balance and particularly recognize context. But, for better or worse right now, this is the predominant form of A&R, particularly in the last, 12, 13 months now, where there haven't been concerts to go to. There haven't been meetings to have. This is really the only way that people are consuming and then discovering music is just purely digitally.
And as for you guys at Meddling, then, what types of technology and data are you using to help those A&R reps discover relevant new artists?
So I view our job as just A&R coverage, which is a little bit different. This is kind of the idea when you work in an A&R department with a team of A&Rs, that someone was on top of one segment, someone was on another segment, and whether that meant you were going to these venues, the other A&Rs were going to these venues, or you were talking to these lawyers, the other A&Rs were talking to the other lawyers, to make sure you had full picture and full concept of everything that was moving, with very little redundancy. And I view the job of Meddling as just another form of A&R coverage. You still have to have those guys covering all of those other things, but then you also need to very quickly know that you're covering everything else, and that's an extremely difficult job that thankfully computers can help with. So it's really just knowing that you're covering everything that's happening, not just online in terms of social actual online consumption that's happening there, but also tracking offline consumption that is trackable online these days. So what are people listening to? Where are they listening to it? What are people, then tagging or mentioning? What are the trends that are starting to move? So at least that that, as a company, you're on top of everything. You're aware of everything.
And before you came on the podcast today, I also read that you recently unveiled a new version of Meddling, which was built for music publishers to discover songwriters. So, how does Meddling make it easier to discover songwriters too?
So the original version was built, because I came from the record label side, just doing record label A&R. And I think if you're not in music, that tends to be what you think of as the music business. These are record labels signing artists to these recording contracts. But the truth is there's a whole other side to the business that are music publishers. So music publishers are signing songwriters and not artists, although, a lot of times those songwriters are also artists. The songwriters are people who are actually composing the songs, the lyrics and melodies. So the music publishers actually own the intellectual property of the song. The record labels only own the recorded embodiment of those compositions. So, a few years ago now, I was looking around, I had kind of all of the labels I thought were going to be customers on as customers, and knew that, the total addressable market here may be very small, but I need to grow this somehow. And so was thinking through, who else does this kind of discovery? Who else would benefit from this kind of coverage? And the next closest analog to record labels are publishers. So the really hard part was going and matching the actual records to the underlying compositions. And this is, a problem that has plagued the industry and will continue to plague the industry. And it took about 5 years of building, learning layers on top of various data sets in order to blend together something that I have that I, at least have a high confidence in being accurate, that does, the best job possible to match these records to these compositions, and therefore, allowing publishers to view the same consumption data through the lens of songwriter who is available to be published.
And if, aside from record labels and music publishers, is there anyone else that could benefit from the type of discovery tools that you're offering with Meddling? For
a really long time, I thought the answer was no. Yeah. In fact, I thought it was even smaller than that. I thought it was really just going to be the major labels who do this kind of thing. And I am thankfully wrong. It really has been, a transformational year, obviously, in the industry. And now I have, all kinds of smaller labels on, but now also, booking agencies, William Morris, these people, people who are assigned to, swallowing up a whole bunch of artists and can book them in venues. They have much lower barrier to entry, much lower cost in new signings. So they tend to sign a whole bunch of things. So they need, a good way to kind of hoover up all of the available talent out there. And also, quite a few management companies now as well, both in helping to track their own artists, but in looking for new artists to sign to their management company, or artists that, their artists should collaborate with who are on their way up, or songwriters that they should put together with their artists or songwriters to record new songs, and all kinds of new uses.
What really intrigues me is how the worlds of technology and music are colliding right now, and the kind of opportunities that will open up. Is there anything in particular that excites you about that?
There's a lot. I think for a long time, the music industry was just terrified of its own shadow. There had been a boom and bust of a number of different formats, and we've only seen in the last really, 7-10 years, maybe, a growth again based on now streaming. And the technology for the first, 5-6 years of that was really just consumer facing. It was coming from the consumption side. And then the industry kind of shuffled its feet and had to adapt slightly to make that work. But now that, there's again, a lot of optimism and a lot of money in the industry, we're starting to see people get involved in the business side, in the actual music side of the business, rather than just the consumer side. And this is what's going to be really interesting the next few years. If we do it right, there could be some very fun ways, some very efficient ways to bring changes into how the business itself runs, and not just the consumer side. The artists, songwriters, managers, lawyers, labels have been just incredibly underserved and under-resourced for a very long time. And I think that now we're starting to see a lot of people play around in the space and get excited about the idea. Now that there's a real market there in, fixing the entire chain rather than just the consumer side.
Love that. And I've loved chatting with you today. But before I let you go, one of the things that I always do around this moment of the podcast is ask the guest if there's a particular song that has inspired them in the past, helped them on their career, or get their head in the zone before going on stage, and then add that song to a Spotify playlist. Now, I'm sure all the songs you listen to are not even available on Spotify. But if there is a song, is there anything that stands out for you and why?
Well, I mean, they all are now. My A&R days are behind me at this point. I just sit and code a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I for a number of different situations, there are a number of different songs. But I always like to kind of remind that myself and the music business to not take ourselves too seriously. So I was just listening to Opportunities by the Pet Shop Boys the other day for a good laugh, but it's also, I mean, it is a, I don't think this is what it was actually written about, but I actually don't know history, and should, but it is a kind of very tongue-in-cheek song about people looking for opportunities, for people trying to make lots of money and not being particularly clever about it. And I think it's a good kind of pump-up song and also humbling reminder that, we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously here.
And the question I've got to ask, of course, is who's got the brains and who's got the looks then?
Well, I think the industry fancies itself as having the brains, and the artists fancy themselves as having the looks or the talent. But I think we know that's not always the way it goes.
Oh, excellent. Well, let's make lots of money. But before I let you go, can you remind the listeners of where they can find you guys online and contact your team if they've got any questions?
Sure, it's just meddling.co, meddling.co. And there's a link there to email me right on the homepage. It was just info@meddling.co.
Well, there's so much I love chatting with you about today, in particular how the worlds of music and technology collide, and also just helping people understand and see the world of music and technology a little bit different and how the two are converging. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing that story with me today.
No, thank you for having me.
So a big thank you to Travis for sharing how record labels and music publishers and AR reps find emerging artists to sign. But here in 2021, how that role has evolved and how tech is changing the process and how consumption data is changing the way that music businesses discover musical talent. And one of the things I always try and do on this podcast is get people thinking differently about how tech is impacting almost everything that surrounds us. And I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. And for everyone listening, how are you seeing technology change the music industry? I want to hear the good, the bad, the ugly, absolutely everything, especially if you're a musician or working in the industry. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But that's it for today. So I'm going to sing along to the Pet Shop Boys. Thanks to Travis for giving me that earworm. But I do invite you all to join me again tomorrow, where we'll explore another area of how technology is transforming our life, work, and even world. So thanks for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.